Am I the a-hole for refusing to pay for my brother's grad school after discovering my parents had a secret $25,000 fund for me? I've, 30F, been financially independent since graduating college. I worked practically full-time while studying, recently paid off my student loans on my own, and just started saving to buy a home. I didn't apply to grad school because I couldn't afford it, and my parents made it pretty clear growing up that we needed to stand on our own after high school. They ingrained that mindset into me early on, constantly reminding me that once I turned 18, my financial trajectory was entirely my own responsibility. Because of that, my 20s were an exhausting blur of waitressing shifts, entry-level corporate grinds, and living with multiple roommates in cramped apartments just to make ends meet. Every single milestone I achieved was bought with my own sweat and sacrificed weekends. When I finally made that last student loan payment, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my chest, and I immediately pivoted to dreaming about stability. I opened a separate high-yield savings account and began channeling every spare dollar toward a down payment for a house of my own. My brother, 22M, is honestly a genius. He worked really hard in school, got a full academic ride to a great state school, and graduated with honors. I'm so proud of him. He is incredibly dedicated, staying up all hours of the night to study, and he deserves every bit of praise he gets. There is zero animosity between us regarding his intellect or his achievements. I have always been his biggest cheerleader. The problem now is he recently got into an extremely prestigious grad program that would open a lot of doors for him. It is a highly competitive, top-tier program that aligns perfectly with his career goals. He was hoping for scholarships or a paid internship to cover most of it, but it's not enough. The financial aid package he received was bare bones, and the internships offered only a small stipend that barely scratches the surface of actual living expenses. Now he's facing tuition and housing costs in one of the most expensive cities in the country. The reality of high rent, groceries, and steep institutional fees hit him all at once, and his dreams suddenly seemed out of reach. My parents asked if I could help out and suggested I contribute around $15,000 to get him through the first year. They sat me down for what I thought was just a regular family dinner, but the mood quickly shifted into a heavy, coordinated pitch. They detailed how much my brother was short for his tuition and living arrangements. They explained their plan, they'd match it, and he'd take loans for the rest. They looked at me expectantly, as if this was a completely reasonable request to make of a sibling who has spent years budgeting down to the last penny.
I said no.
I tried to be as gentle but firm as possible. I explained that I've been working for over a decade on my own goals, and I'm just now starting to save for a house. I told them that my savings are completely tied up in my future stability, and that pulling 15 grand out of my account would effectively erase years of my hard work and push my dream of homeownership back by another half-decade. I don't feel comfortable putting that on hold, especially when I had to turn down opportunities because there was no help available to me. I remembered the distinct ache of wanting to apply to higher degree programs myself, only to sit at my kitchen table, look at the brutal math of tuition fees, and realize I had no safety net to catch me if I failed. I had to choose the safe, practical route because nobody was offering to match funds or pool resources for me. During the conversation, my mom got frustrated and said they'd be using my other fund to help him instead. She threw her hands up in the air, visibly irritated by my refusal to hand over my hard-earned savings. I asked what she meant, and she said they had set aside about $25,000 for me back when I was in college, meant to be used for a future wedding. I was completely blindsided. The revelation felt like a physical shock, making the room feel suddenly very quiet. I had no idea this fund existed. Not once during all my tightest financial months, not once when I was eating ramen for dinner or stressing over whether my car would pass inspection, had they ever dropped a hint that there was a five-figure sum sitting in an account with my name attached to it. I asked why I wasn't told about it when I was considering grad school, or now while I'm saving for a home. If I had known that money existed, my entire life trajectory might have looked different. I could have applied to advanced programs, or I could have bought a condo years ago and built equity instead of pouring money into rent. She said it was always intended for a wedding, not school or property, and since I haven't needed it, I'm not engaged or in a relationship, they decided to give it to my brother because he has a more immediate need. Her tone was completely matter-of-fact, as if it were a perfectly logical piece of bookkeeping. Because I am single and focused on my career and financial independence, my potential milestones were being deemed irrelevant compared to his immediate academic timeline. I'm not going to lie, I was pissed. The anger was hot and heavy in my throat. I felt like the rules of our household had been completely rewritten overnight. For my entire adult life, the rule was figure it out yourself. But apparently that rule only applied to me. I never got a chance to make a case for how I could have used that money, and now it's just being handed over to someone else. They kept it a total secret, denying me the agency to even ask if it could be repurposed for my actual, real-life needs, rather than a hypothetical wedding that I might not even want or have. I told them I felt hurt and left out. I explained that it felt like I was being penalized for being single and self-sufficient. My mom said I was being unfair and that the money was never promised, and if I didn't want it for a wedding, then it made sense to use it for something meaningful. She completely dismissed the emotional impact of the secrecy, wrapping it up in the guise of family solidarity. Later on, my brother approached me privately to talk about the fallout. My brother told me he didn't know about the wedding fund either, and he understands why I'd be upset, but said he didn't ask for it. He looked genuinely stressed and uncomfortable with the whole situation, sitting across from me and shifting uneasily. He just wants to go to school and thought we were all trying to support each other. He told me he never meant to cause a rift and that he thought our parents were utilizing their own personal savings, not shifting a hidden inheritance away from me. I know my brother worked hard and isn't trying to take anything from me. He didn't orchestrate this secrecy, and he didn't ask our parents to hide money from his older sister for a decade. But I can't help feeling like my parents are punishing me for being practical. They looked at my financial stability, built entirely from my own sacrifices, and decided that because I survived their strict hands-off policy, I didn't need the same support or fairness they are now eagerly rushing to provide for him. Am I the a-hole? Update. Thanks to everyone who commented on my original post. I really appreciated the insight, especially from those who helped me understand why this hit such a nerve. Just to clarify, I have no intention of cutting my parents out over this. A lot of people jump straight to go no contact, but real life is more complicated than that. My parents are not monsters. They let me live at home rent-free during college, helped me when they could, encouraged me academically even when I struggled, and supported me emotionally through a lot of difficult periods in my life. I was not the naturally gifted student my brother is, and they never made me feel stupid for that. They showed up for me in a lot of ways growing up. That is part of why this situation hurt so much in the first place. If they had always been openly unfair, I probably would have brushed it off faster. Instead, this came completely out of nowhere and made me question a lot of assumptions I had about how they viewed my future compared to my brother's. Mother's Day was honestly uncomfortable from the second I walked into the house. Things were polite on the surface, but tense underneath. My mom hugged me, then almost immediately said, "I don't want another fight to ruin today," before I had even really settled in. The problem was I had not gone there planning to fight. I just also did not feel capable of pretending nothing had happened. Brunch itself was awkward in that very specific family way, where everyone acts overly normal because they are trying to avoid the obvious issue sitting in the middle of the room. My dad focused on serving food. My brother mostly stayed quiet. My mom kept changing the subject anytime conversation drifted too close to money, school, or future plans. At one point, I tried bringing the situation up calmly because I did not want weeks of silence and passive aggression dragging things out further. My mom immediately shut it down and repeated that she wanted a peaceful day. After that, I realized there was no productive conversation happening there, so I stayed another hour or so, gave her the flowers I brought, and left after brunch. For a few days after that, things stayed relatively quiet except for occasional texts from my dad checking in. Then last weekend we finally sat down and had a proper conversation about everything. My brother was there too because at that point the entire issue involved all four of us, whether anyone liked it or not. The first thing my brother said was that he genuinely had no idea the wedding fund existed until the argument happened. Apparently, our parents never mentioned it to him either. He looked uncomfortable the entire conversation and honestly more guilty than defensive. He told me that when our parents first approached him about financing grad school, they mentioned that I might contribute toward the first-year costs along with them. He assumed they had already discussed it with me privately before bringing it up to him. He said he never imagined I would find out about hidden savings during the same conversation where I was being asked to hand over $15,000. He also admitted that after our argument happened, he started reevaluating the entire plan because he realized what accepting the money would actually mean long-term. For context, he graduated early in December and had already applied to both MBA programs and full-time jobs while finishing undergrad. The grad program he got into is genuinely incredible and extremely competitive, so everyone had been treating it like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But once the financial reality set in, especially the tuition combined with housing costs in such an expensive city, things started looking different. He said he originally assumed he could make the numbers work through scholarships, internships, loans, and part-time work, but the gap ended up much bigger than expected. That is when our parents stepped in financially. Apparently, he had intended to pay me back eventually if I helped with the first year. But after actually sitting down and projecting what his debt load would look like, he realized repayment would realistically take years. He flat out admitted that even if he paid me back eventually, it would still completely derail my current goals in the meantime, especially buying a house. Hearing that from him mattered more than I expected. Not because I wanted him to feel guilty, but because it reassured me that he actually understood why this situation upset me instead of viewing me as selfish. He told us he is now leaning toward deferring the program for at least a year and focusing on getting work experience first. He already started applying more seriously to jobs in his field and said he thinks entering grad school with professional experience might actually benefit him long-term anyway. My mom was very unhappy about that. She became emotional almost immediately and said she felt like he was giving up an amazing opportunity because I was being bitter about money. That comment honestly hit me harder than the original argument did because it completely reduced everything I had been trying to explain into jealousy or resentment. I told her I was not bitter about my brother succeeding. I am proud of him. I always have been. The issue was never that he got opportunities. The issue was finding out there had been money available this entire time that I was never told about while making major life decisions under the assumption there was no financial support available for me. I reminded her that I had seriously considered grad school myself years ago and decided against it primarily because I could not justify the debt. Around that same period, I was also working constantly, paying my loans and putting off things like traveling, moving cities, or changing careers because financial stability came first. Finding out there had been $25,000 sitting in an account connected to my future while I struggled through those decisions felt awful. Not because I think I was entitled to it automatically, but because I never even knew the option existed. That is when my dad finally stepped in and explained where the money actually came from. Apparently, after I was born, he started quietly saving for what he imagined would eventually become my wedding someday. He grew up in a family where weddings were considered huge milestones, especially for daughters, and he said putting money aside for that just felt natural to him at the time. Then, when my brother was born, they started a similar savings account for him intended for a future wedding or eventual family expenses too. Neither of us knew these funds existed. According to my dad, they never mentioned them because the money was always viewed as future family milestone money, not emergency savings or education funds. When my brother got into this graduate program and financial aid fell short, they started discussing whether his account should be repurposed towards school instead. After I refused to contribute directly, they decided using both accounts temporarily would solve the issue, and apparently they planned to rebuild mine later over time. I understand the logic when it is explained that way. I genuinely do. But hearing it still hurt because it unintentionally revealed how differently our futures had been imagined from the beginning. Even if they never consciously meant it that way, it is difficult not to notice that my account was framed around a hypothetical wedding while my brother suddenly became flexible enough to support career advancement. A lot of commenters on my original post called the situation sexist, and honestly that conversation forced me to admit there probably is some truth to that, even if it was completely unintentional. I do not think my parents sat around actively deciding my brother's ambitions mattered more than mine. I truly do not believe that. But I do think there was an underlying assumption that my life path would naturally center around marriage and family, while his would center around career and achievement. And the frustrating thing is that I am the practical child. I always have been. I budget carefully. I avoided debt where possible. I worked consistently. I made safer decisions financially because I thought I had no backup plan. So learning there actually had been a financial cushion connected to my future all along created this weird mix of gratitude, sadness, anger, and confusion all at once. To my parents' credit, though, they did listen when I explained that. My dad apologized sincerely for never telling me sooner. He admitted that if he could go back, he would have handled the entire conversation differently instead of springing it on me in the middle of asking for money. My mom was quieter during that part. I still do not think she fully agrees with my perspective, but I could tell she at least understood why the situation affected me emotionally. That alone felt like progress compared to where things started. Toward the end of the conversation, my brother asked if I would help him with his resume and interview prep while he figures out his next steps. I said yes immediately. At the end of the day, none of this is really his fault. He worked incredibly hard to get where he is. He deserves opportunities. He deserves support. My frustration was never about him succeeding. I just needed my parents to understand why discovering hidden financial plans tied to my future made me feel overlooked in ways I had never fully processed before. Things are not magically perfect now. There is still some lingering tension, especially with my mom. But the situation feels much more honest than it did before, and I think everyone understands each other better now than they did a few weeks ago. We're not back to 100%, but it feels better. I'm glad we talked. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.